So Donald Trump, the frontrunner of the Republican Party, says that he's not ruling out a database of Muslims. He says when it comes to going after ISIS, we should take out their families. Should this be the national security policy of the Republican Party?
I don't think so, Jake. In terms of the families, look, we have these counterterrorism task forces across this country headed by the FBI. And I trust the intelligence community. They need more tools. I mean, Jake, one of the problems that we have is these folks have been able to encrypt their messages. We know that that was the case in Paris, and we suspect it's the case here. In other words, they can communicate, and our intelligence community, intelligence authorities, cannot see those communications. This is really troubling. This is the issue of encryption. And in order to solve that, that problem is going to have to be solved by the technology companies, the government. We're going to have to get together, because if, in fact, our intelligence community cannot see what's going on, cannot understand the communications, then we're operating in the dark. And look, we have a counterterrorism task force right here in Ohio. They're spread across the country. We work with them. It includes local law enforcement, and they have to have the tools that they need in order to be effective. But to say that somebody knew something or whatever, I mean, we have to rely on the intelligence community to draw their conclusions and do their investigations.
Is there any evidence that encryption played a role in this attack? In the Paris attacks just recently, we heard the same call for encryption technology to be released to the intelligence community, and it seems as though that the terrorists there were communicating on Facebook. They were basically hiding in plain sight.
Well, I think a lot of it, Jake, from the intelligence people I talk to, the ones that I'm familiar with here in our state, is basically the fact that these two out in California may have been communicating, but they may have, as they say, have gone dark. In other words, I know that there were people being monitored who they were in touch with, but we also know that this couple had not been identified. So, no, I think the issue of encryption is for real. It is serious, and the Congress needs to get on it, because we're going to require a national solution. But look, let's just go back to one other thing that I think is critical. I don't believe that we can defeat ISIS just from the air, and I don't think we can rely on just other people to take care of that job. I believe the United States should be leading an effort right now to assemble a coalition just like we saw in the first Gulf War. And I remember when the ambassador from Egypt to the United States stood in the Rose Garden and pledged support. And we were able to drive Saddam out of Kuwait. That was a serious matter. This is a much more serious matter. And we should be using everything we can to assemble a coalition of the West and our friends in the Middle East. And we need to go and destroy ISIS where they are. And then, Jake, you know, I've also talked about the battle of ideas, and we're increasingly beginning to wonder about why people affiliate with ISIS. You know, when people have no meaning in their lives, they begin to do things that sometimes can be totally crazy. And so I believe that the West, along with our moderate Muslim friends, need to communicate that we're about civilization, we're about life, those kinds of things, but immediately destroy ISIS in a coalition on the ground. You mark my words, we will ultimately have to do it. And the longer we wait, the more complicated and the more costly it will be.
Your campaign released a web video last week that I want to ask you about. It likened Donald Trump to Nazis in some way. Let's roll a little bit of that.
You might not care if Donald Trump says Muslims must register with their government because you're not one. And you might not care if Donald Trump says it's okay to rough up black protesters because you're not one. But think about this. If he keeps going and he actually becomes president,
so
he might just get
Governor Kasich, it's based on the famous Niemöller poem about the Nazis saying first they came for the labor unions, I was not one, I did not speak up, et cetera, et cetera. The Nazis killed 12 million people. It seems a little extreme and perhaps even a lot desperate to compare Donald Trump to the Nazis.
Well, Jake, that's not what's being done here. And the gentleman that you hear speaking is a former POW who feels very strongly about the United States being united. This is a message about uniting people. When you attack Hispanics, when you characterize all Muslims in a very negative way, when you insult women, We don't think that that's good. We think at this point in time, more than any other time, we need to have America united, and we need to have an American president who's going to unite us and not divide us. And it's no more than that, and any read into it more than that is certainly not what was intended or what was meant.
On that line of criticism against the frontrunner Donald Trump, the Washington Post this morning in an editorial is calling for Republican leaders, Speaker Ryan, Leader McConnell, you, to state publicly that you would never endorse or vote for Trump. They feel like he is that negative an influence in American politics. Are you willing to do that?
Jake, I signed a pledge that I would support the Republic. I think that's what we did at the first debate when we raised our hands. But look, I have to tell you, I've been all over New Hampshire. I've had 37 town hall meetings and a zillion other meetings there. And I believe that Donald Trump will not be the nominee. I think things will settle down, and I believe at the end of the day, and what I've heard in New Hampshire is his experience is what counts. Somebody who's been a reformer, but somebody who has experience. And I think we look for somebody at the end who knows how to land the plane. So I don't think we'll ever get to that point. And it's interesting the Post is saying that. I mean, I don't have any comment other than the fact that I don't think we'll ever get to that point. And I doubt that you think so either.
Actually, the truth of the matter is, I keep being asked this by people whenever I do interviews or family members. I've seen no evidence to the contrary that anyone other than Donald Trump will be the Republican Party nominee. He keeps getting stronger. In our latest poll, he's 36%. Now, that's a national poll. But do you just not believe these polls?
Well, Jake, first of all, it gets to be about who's going to vote. It's not just about what a number is today. I think David Brooks wrote an interesting column in the New York Times where he said, I went rug shopping and I liked the bright one, but when the time came to actually buy one, that is not the one I bought. And so my sense is that, here he came to Ohio, had a big crowd, thousands of people, and 10 minutes into it, the crowd was leaving, and about half the crowd by the end of his appearance. I think people are very concerned about the current state of affairs. They want change. They absolutely want somebody that's going to shake it up, which I've done all of my life by balancing the federal budget and balancing the budget in Ohio. But they also want somebody that has a real plan to move this country forward, both economically and, of course, in the area of national security and foreign policy. So do I believe them? No, I don't necessarily believe what I see because it's not a poll on likely voters. And I just can tell you what I see in New Hampshire. I'm in New Hampshire constantly. And I am convinced that at the end, they are going to opt for somebody who's got the experience. And I think it's going to happen all throughout the country.
I want to ask you about something that President Obama and Democrats in the Senate have been pushing for, whether or not people who are on these terror watch lists or no-fly lists should be allowed to purchase firearms or explosives. A bill that would ban them was voted down Thursday in the Senate. How would you have voted on that bill?
Well, Jake, on the no-fly list, we probably could keep them from getting guns and ought to ban them. But on the watch list, I can tell you that even in our state, when we stop somebody, when our law enforcement stops somebody who's on the watch list, we don't tell them they're on the watch list. We want to make sure that we can exploit all the information that we can possibly get. So if all of a sudden you tell everybody who's on the watch list that you can't do this or that, then guess what happens? Then we lose our ability to track. We lose our ability to gather information. So I think we have to be careful. Of course, it makes common sense to say that if you're on a terrorist watch list, you shouldn't be able to go out and get a gun, although you'll be able to get it illegally. But what we have to deal with is the fact that we don't want to tip somebody off that they're under review and that we could be gathering critical information to disrupt the plot. All of this is about having the information to disrupt. Not about that's what the intelligence business is all about, because once it happens, we know how tragic it is. So what we have to do is make sure we do disrupt. We just arrested somebody like 3 weeks ago who was in Akron who pledged loyalty to ISIS.
Right.
We have to know who they are. So let's just balance this in terms of what is in the best interest of gathering intelligence and keeping us safe.
But let me just game this out. So somebody's on the terror watch list, not the no-fly list where they would already know. They're on the terror watch list. And so they're being surveilled. They go in to buy an AR-15, and you think that that person should be able to get it because you don't want to tip them off that they're on a terror watch list?
Well, what I think, Jake, is I think we have to be careful in the way we do this. Look, everybody wants to get a slick little answer and a 100% answer. As governor in Ohio, I have to sit down with people who are very knowledgeable in a whole variety of ways. And then we look at it and we try to figure out what is the common sense solution. So if there is a practical way to limit it, yes, but I think we also have to weigh it off against our ability to surveil. So some of these things, just like the issue of encryption, for example, the technology companies are very concerned that if you give a gateway into the area of encryption, people could then, the other people could go in and begin to hack those people. So you have to sit down and you have to figure things out. You know, presidential campaigns don't always lend themselves to reasonable discussions, but as a leader, as a CEO that's run a state, the 7th largest state in the country, you look at a problem and you try to figure out unique ways to solve it. And so this is something that has to be considered from many different sides so we don't make a big mistake again.